I'm the new heir to this company. The sentence sliced through the polished boardroom like a lightning strike on a clear afternoon. Every gray-suited executive around the obsidian conference table turned in perfect unison toward the doorway. There, framed by the glass doors of the 34th floor boardroom of Harrington Global, stood a 16-year-old black girl with a worn canvas backpack hanging off one shoulder and sneakers that had clearly lived through more than one school year. Her curls were pulled back in a simple bun, and there was a quiet defiance in her eyes that did not match the scuffed soles of her shoes. At the head of the table, Victor Harrington, self-made millionaire, CEO, and reigning king of this glass tower, leaned back in his leather chair and laughed. Not a chuckle, but a booming, delighted laugh that made the crystal pendants on the chandelier tremble. "You!" he managed between bursts of amusement, wiping at the corner of his eye. "You are the heir?" A couple of board members joined in nervously, eager as always to mirror Victor's mood. A few others traded looks that mixed irritation with curiosity, like men interrupted during a particularly important game. "You shouldn't even be on this floor, kid," Victor said finally, lifting his hand as if signaling security. "This is a restricted level." The girl didn't flinch. She took 3 measured steps into the room, letting the door close softly behind her. The executives' faces, all older, all male, all white, stared back at her from behind identical ties and suits that cost more than a year's rent in half the neighborhoods in the city. "My name is Zaria Cole," she said, her voice steady, almost calm. "And I'm not here by mistake. I'm here to claim my rightful inheritance in Harrington Global." The CFO, Leonard Briggs, shifted in his chair and muttered under his breath to the man beside him, "These people have lost their minds." The words were quiet, but not quiet enough. Zaria's eyes flicked toward him, the smallest flash of ice crossing her face. Then she smiled, a polite, contained smile that never made it to her eyes. 6 months earlier, Zaria's life had looked nothing like this. Back then, she lived in a cramped apartment on the south side, with peeling paint, thin walls, and a view of a dumpster that smelled worse on hot days. She was known as the cleaner's kid, raised by her grandmother, Miss Ruth, after her mother's early death from a sudden illness. The name of her father was a blank space on every form, every document, every school record. Her mother, Nina, had worked nights as a cleaner in corporate buildings, including, ironically, this very tower. But she never spoke much about the men upstairs. When Zaria asked about her father, Nina always said the same thing. He wanted to be there, but life got complicated. Then she would change the subject. The truth, Zaria would later learn, was more complicated than any teenage imagination could have constructed. Back in the boardroom, Victor stood up now, using his height to loom over her. He was broad-shouldered, silver hair cut immaculately, a bespoke suit tailored to someone who expected the room to tilt in his direction. "Whatever game you're trying to play ends now," he said, voice dropping into that dangerous softness that had made grown men in this company resign overnight. "I suggest you turn around and walk out before I call security and have you escorted downstairs." Zaria carefully swung her backpack off her shoulder and set it on the polished floor. "Before you do that," she replied, unzipping the bag, "you might want to see this." She reached inside and pulled out an old yellowing cardboard folder, the kind that belonged in a government filing cabinet, not in the hands of a teenager in a corporate boardroom. The executives exchanged looks: annoyance, disbelief, curiosity. Victor snatched the folder from her hand with a derisive snort and flipped it open. The snort died halfway out of his throat. His face drained, as if someone had quietly pulled the plug on the color beneath his tan. Tucked neatly inside the folder were 3 things: a certified DNA test, a birth certificate, and a will. "No," he whispered, his fingers tightening on the paper. This is ridiculous. Daniel never—" He stopped himself, but the name hung in the air like a ghost. Daniel Harrington, Victor's younger brother, co-founder of Harrington Global, the man whose portrait still hung in the lobby beside Victor's, the brother who had died in a car crash 14 years ago. Zaria tilted her head, adopting a look of mild curiosity that didn't match the thundering of her heart. "He never told you about his daughter?" she asked softly. "That's strange, because he made it very clear in his will that if anything happened to him, his child would receive her share of the company when she turned 16. The room fell completely silent. The ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall suddenly sounded obscenely loud. Leonard cleared his throat. Even if these documents were legitimate, he said, adjusting his glasses, a minor can't just stroll into a board meeting and, with proper legal representation, Zari interrupted gently, a minor can absolutely exercise her rights as an heir. Victor's fist clenched, his jaw tightening so hard a muscle pulsed in his cheek. You think you can just show up out of nowhere, he hissed, from some slum, wave paperwork you printed off the internet, and hijack a billion-dollar company? Zaria's lips curved into that same polite, controlled smile. Mr. Harrington, I didn't show up from nowhere, she replied. I've spent months preparing for this moment, and I have one question for you. She took a step closer to the table, her gaze sweeping the faces around it. Do you really think I'd walk into this room without being absolutely certain of what I'm entitled to? If you are watching this as a story and wondering how a teenager from the wrong side of town ended up challenging an entire corporate empire, keep listening, because what you're seeing in this boardroom is only the result. The real story started half a year earlier, with a dusty box, a dying grandmother, and a secret that refused to stay buried. 6 months before this confrontation, Zari had been sitting at the kitchen table in their small apartment, textbooks spread around her, the smell of Miss Ruth's herbal tea filling the room. Her grandmother slid an old cardboard box across the table. I promised your mama I'd give you this when you were ready, she said, her voice even weaker than usual that day. And baby, after what the doctor said, I don't have time to argue with fate. Inside the box, under a folded cleaning uniform and a stack of old pay stubs from Harrington Global, Zaria found photos. A man in his 30s with the same sharp eyes she saw in the mirror. A man in a tailored suit standing in front of a building whose logo she recognized from 1,000 downtown billboards. Harrington Global. There was also a letter, old but carefully preserved, written in a handwriting steady and elegant. If anything happens to me, Nina, make sure she knows. I wanted her. I planned for her. And I made sure she would be protected, even if my brother tries to shut the door on her. Daniel. In the days that followed, Zaria's world rearranged itself. Her father had not been a ghost, not a deadbeat who disappeared. He had been a co-founder of one of the most powerful companies in the city, and he had expected her to show up one day. He had just not lived long enough to see it. Back in the present, in the boardroom, Leonard tried another angle. Even if this DNA test is real, he said, forcing a chuckle, anyone can fake a document these days. You can download a template, change a few lines. You can call the lab and confirm it, Zaria cut in smoothly. Genesis Diagnostics, case number 1943K, verification code Q7B842. They keep records for 5 years, but they archive genetic matches involving corporate beneficiaries for 10. The room shifted. The men looked at one another, silently calculating the odds that a girl from the South Side could fabricate details like that. Victor slammed the documents back on the table. This is absurd. Even if Daniel was your father, that doesn't give you the right to barge in here after 14 years and demand— 14, she corrected softly. He died when I was 2. The precision of the correction hit a nerve. Victor turned away toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of the city. It was a posture he adopted whenever he wanted to remind people how small they were compared to him. You think you understand what this company is? He said, staring out at the skyline. You think you can just claim something you didn't help build? For someone who thinks I don't understand, Zaria replied quietly, you'd be surprised how much I know. She let the words hang there. Then she dropped the first hint. For instance, I know Harrington Global is under federal investigation for discriminatory hiring practices. I know you lost 3 major contracts this year over diversity issues. And I know your board has been pushing for change. Change you've been resisting. Victor's shoulders stiffened. Leonard nearly choked. How did she know that? Those files barely left the executive floor. Half the men in the room didn't even have clearance to see the full reports. How did you— Victor began. Zoria didn't let him finish. I also know, she continued, that my father didn't just die in a random car accident, like the story you've told everyone for 14 years. He was on his way to pick up his daughter from daycare, just like he did every Tuesday and Thursday since my mother died. And he called someone earlier that evening saying he'd discovered something in the company's financials that didn't smell right. The human resources director, Miguel Torres, whispered to the man next to him, "How does she know that?" Zaria turned her gaze on him like a spotlight. "Because I did my homework, Mr. Torres," she said. "I tracked down the daycare owner. I interviewed former receptionists and night guards. I followed paper trails people like you assumed would stay buried. You thought you erased Daniel from this company's history. You forgot that real people remember real people." Victor finally turned away from the window, his face a mask of thinly contained rage. "Even if every word you've said is true," he growled, "you're still a minor. You can't sit at this table. You can't run anything." Zaria nodded. "You're right," she said calmly. "A 16-year-old can't run a billion-dollar corporation alone." She glanced at the glass doors behind her. "But I don't have to." Right on cue, the doors opened. An elegant black woman in her mid-40s stepped into the boardroom like she owned the floor. Her dark suit was razor sharp, her heels clicked with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the building, and the leather briefcase she carried looked heavy enough to change lives. "Sorry for being a few minutes late," she said, her voice smooth but cutting. "Traffic." She walked right past the stunned executives and stopped beside Zaria. "I'm Denise Porter," she said, looking Victor in the eye. "Former Chief Operating Officer of Harrington Global. I worked directly with Daniel for 8 years, until someone made it very clear that my competence and ambition were no longer welcome here." Victor's face turned the color of paper. "Denise," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" She smiled and set her briefcase on the table, next to Zaria's folder. "I came to meet my new client," she replied. "Zaria contacted me 3 months ago. I have to say, her research into what really happened in this company impressed me more than anything I saw in my years working for you." Zaria did not move from her seat, but her posture changed. She was no longer one teenage girl facing a wall of powerful men. She was a claimant who had brought someone who knew every secret they thought they'd buried. And none of the men at the table had the faintest idea that the worst was yet to come. 3 months before that boardroom confrontation, Zaria had sat in a quiet corner of a public library with an ancient desktop computer humming in front of her and a legal pad filled with names, dates, and arrows. She had always been good with patterns, numbers, codes, systems, the kind of things grown-ups called advanced and guidance counselors called potential. Her grandmother called it the way your brain dances, baby. When Miss Ruth's health took a sharp turn, the doctor's words had been blunt. Time was short. The box had come soon after. So had the decision. "If Daniel set something up for you," Miss Ruth had told her, breathing shallow from the old armchair, "you won't find it by staying scared. You'll find it by going where he built things." So Zaria did. She started where most people start when they don't know where to begin. Google, Harrington Global, corporate history, founders, old press clippings, photos, annual reports. There he was, Daniel Harrington, standing slightly to the left of Victor in every early picture, smiling like a man who believed the future would give him time. Then she went deeper. Government business registries, old SEC filings, charity sponsorships, conference videos. She watched every interview where Victor mentioned "my brother Daniel" with a rehearsed fondness that never quite reached his eyes. She noticed the years when the mention stopped. Zaria wrote everything down: dates, addresses, names of executives who appeared repeatedly, firms that handled their audits, law firms on retainer. She noticed tiny anomalies: companies that showed up once and disappeared, consulting contracts that lasted only a few months, patterns of resignations that clustered around certain years. She did all this between school, her part-time job at a corner store, and evenings helping Miss Ruth with medication and heating pads. But the key turned when she met a woman named Mrs. Caldwell, the retired owner of a daycare center. They sat at a kitchen table in a small house that smelled of lemon cleaner and nostalgia. Mrs. Caldwell listened as Zaria showed her an old photo from the box, a younger version of the woman, holding a toddler in her arms, with Daniel kneeling beside them. "That's you," Mrs. Caldwell said softly, touching the photo, "and that is your daddy." She remembered Daniel, remembered how he picked Zaria up twice a week, never late, always bringing a small toy or a book. Remembered how one Tuesday he never arrived. He called that day, she told Zaria, said he'd be there later than usual, said something about having to swing by the office first because he'd found something in some figures? She frowned, searching for the word. He sounded bothered. Disturbed? Zaria suggested. Yes, Mrs. Caldwell nodded. That's it, disturbed. The accident that killed him happened 3 blocks from the daycare, less than an hour later. The official record described it as a tragic collision in the rain. But something inside Zaria refused to let that be the end of the sentence. Her investigation grew teeth. She tracked down former receptionists who had worked at Harrington Global the year her father died. Some refused to talk. A few agreed off the record on the condition that no names would ever be mentioned. From them, she learned that Daniel's access badge had been flagged a few weeks before his death. Internal conflicts, heated meetings behind closed doors. Then, almost as if the company was trying to pull a curtain shut, records started to vanish. When Zaria requested her birth certificate from the hospital, she was told it was temporarily inaccessible due to a digital archiving issue. A clerk, whispering over the phone, told her that the system showed her file had been moved 3 days after Daniel's death, a date that should have had no connection to a newborn's paperwork. The same pattern repeated itself in other places. Old tax filings involving Daniel, a daycare pickup authorization form with his signature, a life insurance communication. Each time she either received a missing file message or a replacement document that curiously no longer mentioned Daniel's name. Most people would have shrugged and given up. Zaria started tracking the dates of these accidents. She discovered that 17 documents connected to Daniel had been lost, corrupted, or replaced over the last 14 years. 17. All within narrow 48-hour windows, almost always on Friday afternoons, when fewer staff were around and everyone wanted to go home. Her math brain kicked in. Too many coincidences stopped being coincidence. One name kept reappearing on vendor contracts associated with those periods. Clearwater Data Solutions, a digital archiving consultancy brought in by the city and several corporations for records modernization. Zaria dug deeper. Buried in a dry, rarely visited corner of a public corporate registry, she found the thing that made her sit up so fast the library chair creaked. Clearwater Data Solutions listed a minority shareholder. His name, Victor Harrington. Back in the present, Zaria stood beside the boardroom table, her tablet glowing in her hands as she flipped through the evidence. Over the past 6 months, she said, voice calm but razor precise, I've tracked 17 key documents connected to my father that were lost or damaged in various departments. She gestured toward the screen, where a neat spreadsheet displayed each file, each date, each agency. Every one of those accidents happened inside a 48-hour window, most on Friday afternoons. And each time, Clearwater Data Solutions had an active contract for digitizing or cleaning up records. She tapped the corner of the tablet. And Clearwater, as you know, lists you as a minority shareholder, Mr. Harrington. The blood drained from Victor's face so quickly it almost looked theatrical. Leonard tugged at his collar, his breathing suddenly shallow. That's conspiracy talk, he snapped. Teenage paranoia. You watch too many movies. Maybe, Zaria said. Or maybe I learned what you never expected someone from my neighborhood to learn, how to follow paper trails. Denise opened her briefcase, the metallic click of the locks echoing in the silent room. But the documents, she said, pulling out a thick stack of printed pages held together with binder clips, are only half the story, gentlemen. Tell them about Mr. Davies, Zaria. A flicker passed over Victor's face. For a second, he forgot to breathe. Harold Davies, Zaria said, scrolling to another file on her tablet, senior accountant at Harrington Global from 1999 to 2009. The man responsible for preparing the financial reports my father reviewed the night he died. Fired 2 weeks after the funeral for unspecified irregularities. Relocated to another state. How did you... Victor began, then stopped, realizing the question betrayed more than he wanted to admit. How did I find him? Zaria finished for him, raising an eyebrow. The way you underestimate teenagers is almost cute. She turned the tablet so the board could see the image on the screen. A photo of a middle-aged man sitting in a modest cafe, talking to someone across the table. The timestamp at the bottom read 3 weeks earlier. Social media, she continued. Old LinkedIn profiles no one bothered to delete. A community newsletter that mentioned his name. Cross-referencing addresses. It took time, but I had time. Denise slid the stack of documents onto the center of the table. Mr. Davies, she said crisply, kept copies of everything. She let that sink in before continuing. 10 years of altered financial reports, fictitious contracts, fake invoices. A well-organized system of funneling money out of Harrington Global through shell companies and holding accounts. How much? Miguel asked hoarsely, already regretting the question. $23,400,000, Zaria answered without looking at her notes. To be exact, spread across 3 banks and 6 shell companies. Leonard grabbed the back of his chair, knuckles white. That's impossible, he whispered. We would have seen that. We signed off on... Exactly, Zaria cut in, turning to him with unsettling calm. You signed off on it. That's the beauty of cooking numbers with people who are too arrogant to believe they'll ever be checked. Victor slammed his hand down on the table. Enough, he shouted. Even if you have 10,000 pages of stolen documents, you are still a child. You have no legal standing. You can't bring charges. You can't... You're right, Zaria said again, almost kindly. She reached up and touched the strap of her backpack with 2 fingers. A tiny red light blinked on a device clipped there. But the law doesn't require me to bring charges personally, she went on. It only requires me to report credible evidence of fraud and to document conversations where that fraud continues. Miguel's head snapped up. Conversations? He croaked. What conversations? Zaria tapped the little device lightly. This one, she said. In this state, it's legal for a minor to record conversations when she has reason to believe a crime has been committed against her. I confirmed that with 3 different lawyers before I walked in. The men around the table froze. Denise closed her briefcase with a soft click, then opened a slim laptop instead. I think, she said, powering it up, it's time you understood something important. She turned the screen toward them. On it, a live stream window was open. The title bar at the top read, Live Exposing Corruption at Harrington Global. The founder's hidden daughter speaks. In the corner, 47,923 watching now. At the side, the chat scrolled in a dizzying blur of outrage, shock, and disbelief. Messages flew faster than any of the men could read. Victor's mouth opened and closed. You're streaming this? He whispered. Live. Zaria checked her phone. 43 minutes, she said. That's how long you've been live. She looked up, and for the first time since entering the room, a full, unrestrained smile crossed her face. And in the last 5 minutes alone, over 17,000 people have watched you deny my inheritance, dismiss my background, and react to the first pieces of evidence. Including, she added, glancing toward the laptop, several viewers whose usernames match federal agencies' public liaison accounts. Panic moved through the room like a wave. Leonard's skin went an alarming shade of gray. Miguel's hands started to tremble. Victor looked, for the first time in his life, like a man who had stepped into a game he did not understand the rules to. None of them knew yet that while they were choking on their own fear, Zaria had already moved 3 steps ahead, because behind the glass doors of that boardroom, an elevator had just dinged, and the people who stepped out of it were about to prove that this was not simply a teenager's crusade. It was an arrest in progress. The boardroom doors opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. 3 people stepped inside, 2 in dark suits with discreet badges at their belts, 1 in a local police detective's dress shirt, his tie slightly loosened as if he'd been pulled from something urgent. The woman in front flashed a badge with practiced efficiency. Good afternoon, she announced, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to entering rooms like this at inconvenient times. I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez with the Federal Financial Crimes Division. This is Agent Patel and Detective O'Rourke from the city's white-collar unit. She glanced briefly at the laptop screen still showing the live stream. Miss Cole, Agent Martinez said, we appreciate you coordinating the timing. Zaria nodded once. Victor stared at the agents, then at Zaria, then back again, like a man watching his own reflection fracture. You can't just walk in here, he snapped, trying to rally, dragging the remnants of his CEO persona around himself like a cloak. This is private property. I'll have you removed. I have lawyers. We have warrants, Agent Martinez interrupted calmly. Multiple, in fact. She removed a set of folded papers from a file and placed them on the table in front of Victor. For the arrest of Victor Harrington on charges of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy. For the arrest of Leonard Briggs as a co-conspirator. And for the arrest of Miguel Torres for aiding in document tampering and obstruction of justice. Leonard tried to stand too quickly and nearly toppled his chair. Miguel sat frozen, tears already pooling in his eyes. You have nothing, Victor insisted, his voice rising. You have a teenager with a grudge and a bunch of forged PDFs. Zaria reached into her backpack again, this time pulling out a second tablet, different from the one she'd used before. Remember Mr. Davies? She asked. You always thought you were the smartest person in every room, Mr. Harrington. You forgot that scared men do unpredictable things. She tapped the screen and turned it so everyone could see. A video began to play. The image showed Victor in his private office 3 years earlier, sitting behind his desk, his face lit by the blue glow of a computer screen. Across from him sat Harold Davies, looking like a man trying very hard not to crack under pressure. The audio was painfully clear. Make sure nothing can be traced back to me, Victor's voice said on the recording. If anyone ever asks, you made the calls on those transfers. You misunderstood the instructions. You panicked. I have too much protection to go down over a few $1,000,000, Harold. In the boardroom, the real Victor went sheet white. That's out of context, he barked. You can twist anything with editing. We'll have experts. We don't need to rely on this one recording, Agent Martinez said. Mr. Davies provided 14 hours of similar material from the last 5 years of his employment with you, along with copies of every report he was ordered to adjust. Detective O'Rourke moved behind Leonard, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Leonard Briggs, he said, voice low, you have the right to remain silent. Leonard jolted like he'd been shocked. No, he blurted, trying to twist away. No, I didn't. I just signed what he gave me. I didn't. Save it for your lawyer, the detective replied, snapping handcuffs around his wrists as the live chat on the YouTube stream exploded with messages. Miguel's lips quivered. My kids, he whispered, staring at the stream. They're going to see this. The whole city is going to see this. Zaria watched him, her expression unreadable. You should have thought about that, she said evenly, before you helped erase my father from the records. Agent Patel moved toward Miguel with a pair of cuffs. The HR director did not resist. He simply buried his face in his hands as the metal clicked around his wrists. Victor remained standing, fists clenched, chest heaving. You think this is going to stick? He shouted at Zaria, ignoring the agents for a moment. You think a girl from the South Side is going to bring me down? I built this company. I built this city's skyline. You and your grandmother in that little roach nest? He cut himself off, but it was too late. Say it, Zaria said softly. Say what you want to say. His eyes blazed. You and your little slum family, he spat, venom finally spilling out. You were never meant to be up here. The chat on the live stream went wild. Messages flew. Did he just say slum family on live? Racist pig exposed. Clip this. Everybody clip this. Agent Martinez glanced at the laptop and then at Zaria. Well, she said, if there was any doubt about public opinion, that just cleared it. Zaria did not gloat. She did not raise her voice. She simply picked up the original folder with the will and birth certificate and slid them back into her backpack. Mr. Harrington, she said, in a few hours your accounts will be frozen. In a few days, every major outlet in this city will have replayed this stream 15 times. In a few weeks, your name will be shorthand for everything wrong with corporate power. She met his gaze steadily. But that's not the part that matters to me. He laughed once, bitter and ragged. Then what does, he demanded. The money. You came here to grab what you could and run back to your little neighborhood. Play queen for a day. No, she said quietly. I came here to do what my father tried to do before you silenced him. She turned to Agent Martinez. You have the rest? She asked. The agent nodded. We do, she said, and we'll be unsealing some of it in court. The rest will be shared with federal administrators when they take temporary control of Harrington Global's operations. Victor staggered as Detective O'Rourke stepped behind him with the cuffs. "You don't know who you're messing with," he hissed at Zaria. "I have friends in government, in the courts. I will—" "You will be escorted to booking," Agent Martinez cut in, voice ice cold. "Then arraigned. Then if the evidence holds up, and it does, you'll spend a very long time in a federal facility." She paused. "And every step of that journey will be watched by millions of people who saw you call a black family slum dwellers, live on the internet." The detective snapped the cuffs on. Victor flinched at the feeling of metal against his wrists. Denise, who had remained composed throughout, finally reached into her briefcase one last time. "There's one more thing," she said. She placed a slim blue folder on the table and opened it with a lawyer's precision. "This," she said, "is the real version of Daniel Harrington's will. The one filed through an independent law firm and placed under a trust that could only be accessed when his daughter turned 16. It was designed to bypass any adjustments you might attempt to make through your own attorneys." She looked at Zaria, then back at the agents. "It places 51% of Harrington Global's voting shares into a trust controlled by his only child, becoming active on her 16th birthday. That was last month." 51? Victor choked. "You're lying. That gives her an absolute controlling stake," Denise finished. "Legally, as of 30 days ago, Miss Zaria Cole became the majority owner of Harrington Global, regardless of what you recognize." Agent Martinez picked up the folder, scanning the signatures, seals, and registration stamps with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen forged wills before. "This was validated?" she asked. Denise nodded. "We had it certified by the court last week," she said. "And we notified federal regulators yesterday that there would likely be developments today." Zaria exhaled slowly. "For 14 years," she said, looking at Victor, "you treated my existence like a problem you could delete from a database. Today, the system you built did the opposite." She straightened her shoulders. "As a majority owner of Harrington Global, my first official act is to suspend the current executive leadership on grounds of fraud and gross misconduct." She glanced around the table, at the empty chairs already starting to feel like relics. "My second act," she continued, "will be to order a full forensic audit of the company's finances going back 15 years, cooperate fully with federal investigators, and pursue civil damages against everyone who participated in stealing what my father built." Leonard, still trembling in his cuffs, began to sob. "I have a family," he pleaded. "A mortgage. Please, I didn't start this. I just—" "You helped it continue," Zaria said. Her voice was not cruel, but it was merciless. "My mother died working herself to death cleaning offices like this. My grandmother is dying in a tiny apartment while you sat up here signing off on stolen millions. Don't talk to me about mortgages." She turned away from him and looked out the window. The same view Victor had used for years to feel invincible. "You may have built this skyline," she said quietly, "but my father helped build this company. You tried to erase him. Today, the city gets to remember his name." She picked up her backpack and slid it onto her shoulder. "A girl like me," she added, glancing back at Victor as the detective led him toward the door. "Just exposed a 15-year conspiracy with a Wi-Fi connection, a second-hand tablet, and an old box from my grandmother's closet." Her mouth curved into a small, satisfied smile. "I think I can handle a few spreadsheets." The door closed behind the handcuffed men. The agents gathered documents. The live stream continued to roll for a few seconds more, capturing the empty chairs, the scattered papers, and the quiet breathing in the room. Then, with a final click, Denise ended the broadcast. On hundreds of thousands of screens across the country, the image dissolved. But for Harrington Global and for Zaria, the real story was only beginning. 6 months later, the boardroom looked almost unrecognizable. The sleek black table was the same. The floor-to-ceiling windows still framed the city in glass. But the faces around the table were entirely different. The portraits on the wall had changed too. Where Victor's portrait had once hung alone beside Daniel's, there was now a third frame. A photo of a young black woman standing in front of the building in a simple blazer, curls caught in a breeze, not self-consciously posing, just existing. Zaria Cole. Harrington Global was no more. The logo etched into the glass near the entrance now read, Cole and Harrington Equity Group. Underneath, in smaller letters, built for everyone who was told the door was closed. Denise sat at the head of the table now, not as a visitor but as the officially appointed CEO. Zaria sat at her right, not a token teenager, but the majority shareholder and head of strategic initiatives. The executives in the room were a mixture of ages, genders, and backgrounds. A woman in her 50s who had once been passed over for promotion because clients prefer a male face. A Latino financial analyst who had quietly resigned from another firm over discriminatory practices. A disabled veteran with degrees in logistics and operations. Two Black women in senior roles. An Asian American risk manager. None of them had expected 6 months ago that they would be building something new at the company, once synonymous with corporate arrogance. The investors' call went well, Denise reported, tapping a pen against a neat stack of reports. They're excited about the new trajectory. The scholarship program is fully funded for the next 5 years, and we have early commitments for another cycle if the impact metrics hold. How many students in the first cohort? Zaria asked. 50, replied Tasha, the new head of community investment. A woman who used to clean night offices while studying for her MBA. 42 from neighborhoods that your old board used to call high risk. We're calling them the Daniel Scholars. Zaria's throat tightened for a moment, but she smiled. Good, she said. He deserves that. On the street below, children played in a small urban park that had not existed 6 months earlier. The company had bought a block of empty, half-abandoned office space the old board had planned to turn into luxury condos. Under the new leadership, the land had been converted into a mixed-use community complex. There was a park, a daycare center offering sliding-scale fees, a co-working space for small local businesses, a community legal clinic that partnered with law schools to provide pro bono assistance. Victor Harrington, meanwhile, was 3 months into a 15-year federal sentence. The clip of him calling Zaria's family slum dwellers had been played on national television, used in ethics lectures at business schools, and dissected in countless think pieces about race, power, and entitlement. Leonard had lost his home, his status, and whatever fragile respect his children once had for him. He was in the middle of a messy divorce in a stack of civil suits. Miguel worked as a sales associate in a big box store on the outskirts of the city. He folded shirts, rang up purchases, and asked customers if they wanted loyalty cards. The irony of a former HR director being put on probation by a retail manager half his age was not lost on anyone who knew his story. Harold Davies, the accountant whose conscience had finally beaten his fear, was preparing for his second year of law school. His tuition was fully funded by the newly established Daniel Harrington Foundation for Second Chances, a nonprofit that focused on helping whistleblowers, formerly incarcerated individuals, and young people from underserved communities retrain for careers outside the cycles that had trapped them. Zaria checked her phone. A message from Harold flashed on the screen. First semester grades are in, straight A's. Tell your father I'm trying to do right by him. Zaria smiled and slipped the phone back into her bag. Denise watched her. How does it feel? She asked quietly when the meeting adjourned and the others drifted out, leaving the two of them by the windows. Zaria looked out at the city, at the small park where a group of kids chased each other around a new jungle gym. It feels like he can finally rest, she said, like the story stopped being about what they did to us and became about what we did anyway. She thought about the live stream that had changed everything, about the endless comments, the flood of messages from people who had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. People who had written things like, I thought I was the only one, and I wish I'd had your courage at 16. She had gone viral not for dancing, not for a prank, but for weaponizing intelligence and preparation against arrogance. At first, the attention had been overwhelming. Journalists had knocked on Miss Ruth's door. TV producers had called nonstop. Influencers had begged her to collaborate. Everyone wanted the face of the girl who took down Harrington Global. Zaria had done only a few carefully chosen interviews, the ones that allowed her to talk about systems, not just scandal. Then she had gone back to work, because revenge, she had realized, was not the point. Rebuilding was. The best part isn't that they went to prison, she said now. turning to Denise. The best part is that every dollar they stole is being turned into something they would have never funded. Scholarships, clinics, community centers, actual chances for kids who grew up like me. Denise nodded. You could have just taken your shares, sold them, and walked away, she observed. You chose the harder path. I watched my mother come home bone-tired from cleaning offices where the people upstairs didn't even know her name, Zaria replied. I watched my grandmother choose between medication and groceries. If I walked away now, what was the point of everything? She paused. Besides, she added with a small, wry smile, I kind of like watching their old friends squirm when they have to sit across from a black girl from the South Side and pitch me their ideas. They both laughed, not cruelly, but with the kind of joy that comes from surviving something you weren't supposed to survive. Outside, a billboard that had once advertised Harrington Global's elite executive services now displayed a different message. A city is only as strong as the doors it opens. At the bottom, in smaller text, Cole and Harrington Equity Group, built for those shut out. In the months since the takeover, more than one rival CEO had tried to smear Zaria, calling her a symbol or a fluke. Each time, the numbers shut them up. Under the new leadership, the company had not only recovered the stolen $23.4 million, but had nearly tripled its profits by implementing fair practices, transparent structures, and outreach that actually listened to the communities it claimed to serve. Funny thing about people, when you pay them fairly, respect their time, and stop treating them like disposable parts, they work better. You know what's really ironic? Zaria said, leaning her forehead briefly against the glass. What? Denise asked. Victor spent his whole life making sure people like me never made it to this floor, she replied. In the end, it was a girl he didn't even believe existed who built the version of his empire he always bragged about. She stepped back from the window, shoulders square. Somewhere in the building, a janitor pushed a cart down a hallway, humming to herself. A security guard from Zaria's old neighborhood watched the monitors and texted his wife that things were finally looking up. A receptionist on a scholarship finished an online class between calls. The story had started with a teenager walking into a room full of men who thought they owned the world. It continued with that teenager proving something that should have been obvious all along. Underestimating someone because they are black, because they are poor, because they are young, is not just immoral. It is strategically stupid. In the end, the men who tried to erase Daniel Harrington were not defeated by rage or riots. They were defeated by preparation, evidence, and a girl who turned every insult, every closed door, every missing document into fuel. For anyone watching this and recognizing a piece of their own story in Zaria's, remember this. You may not own a skyscraper. You may not have a secret will waiting in a dusty box. But you have a mind they never planned for. And when intelligence meets courage, even the most polished boardroom can become a courtroom. If this story of a black teenager who turned injustice into a new kind of empire touched you, imagine how many others are living a quieter version of it right now. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories where the underestimated refuse to stay in the shadows, you already know what to do next.